The Great War didn't just kill millions of men. It shattered the boundary between life and death itself. What I'm about to share with you are 5 documented encounters that military officials couldn't explain, psychiatrists couldn't rationalize, and skeptics couldn't debunk. These stories come from military records, official inquiries, and sworn testimonies. They're not folklore. They're not fiction. They happened. The question isn't whether you believe in ghosts. The question is, what happens when war becomes so horrific that even death can't end the fighting?
Welcome to Brother Board Plays, your home for war stories and history. If you don't want to miss out on the future videos, smash that like button, hit that bell icon, and subscribe to the channel. Let's dive in.
August 23, 1914. The Battle of Mons. British forces are completely surrounded, outnumbered 5-1. German machine guns are cutting down everything in their path. This should have been a massacre. But then, something impossible happened. Witnesses described a phantom army appearing in the sky, ancient bowmen in glowing armor, raining arrows down on the advancing Germans. The enemy halted. Confusion spread through their ranks, and in that moment of chaos, the British escaped. Sounds like desperate men seeing what they needed to see, right? But here's where it gets strange. A journalist named Arthur Machen later admitted he'd completely fabricated this story for the London Evening News. It was fiction. Yet soldiers who'd never read his story came forward with identical accounts. They described the same glowing figures, the same ancient warriors. When pressed, they swore on their lives that what they'd seen was real. Was it mass hysteria? Divine intervention? Or did something else entirely save those men that day? Military investigators couldn't find a rational explanation. But they also couldn't ignore the testimonies of dozens of trained soldiers who all saw the same impossible thing. But if you think that's unsettling, our next encounter takes place not on the battlefield, but in the skies above it. October 1917, the Western Front. A British pilot is returning from a reconnaissance mission when another aircraft pulls alongside him. Nothing unusual there, except this particular plane had been shot down 3 days earlier, and its pilot killed on impact. The dead pilot turned to look at him, his face pale and expressionless, and spoke words that chilled the survivor to his core. "Follow me. I know where they are." Against every instinct, the living pilot followed. The Phantom aircraft led him directly to a hidden German airfield, perfectly positioned for an attack. When the mission was complete, and the British pilot looked for his ghostly guide, the plane had vanished. Military records show that the dead pilot had been hunting that same German squadron for weeks before his death. Somehow, even in death, he'd completed his mission. Psychological trauma, you might think. The stress of combat creating vivid hallucinations. But here's the problem. The intelligence gathered from that phantom encounter was verified. Real German positions, real tactical advantage. How do you hallucinate accurate military intelligence you've never seen? The official report listed the incident as unexplained aerial phenomenon. The pilot who witnessed it never flew again. Battle of the Somme, 1916. A young captain lies dying in no man's land, surrounded by his men. With his final breath, he makes them a promise. "Don't worry, lads. I'll always watch over you." His soldiers thought it was just the delirium of a dying man. They buried their captain and tried to move on with the war. But the captain, it seems, had other plans. Months later, one of those soldiers is working alone in his makeshift garage behind the lines. He hears footsteps approaching from behind, steady, measured, familiar. He turns around, and there stands his captain, unchanged, unwounded, still wearing the same blood-stained uniform from the day he died. "I told you I'd watch over you," the apparition said, before vanishing into the darkness. This wasn't an isolated incident. Multiple soldiers from that same unit reported identical encounters over the following months. Same captain, same promise, same impossible presence. Military psychiatrists suggested these were manifestations of survivors' guilt, the minds of traumatized men creating the protection they desperately needed. But all the soldiers who reported these encounters had the same specific details they'd never discussed with each other. Was it collective delusion born of shared trauma? Or had this captain's final promise transcended death itself? November 1918. Word spreads through the German lines that an armistice has been signed. The war is over. Soldiers emerge from their trenches, celebrating in the streets, embracing strangers, singing songs of peace. There's just one problem. The armistice wouldn't be signed for several more days. Someone had spread false information, and thousands of soldiers had abandoned their positions based on a lie. When the real fighting resumed, the results were catastrophic. Those who had celebrated were caught completely off guard. Villages that had welcomed the peace became graveyards within hours. But here's where the story takes a supernatural turn. In the weeks that followed, witnesses reported seeing the ghostly remnants of that false celebration. Phantom soldiers still dancing in bombed-out squares. Spectral figures singing victory songs in the ruins of churches. Local civilians claimed you could hear their voices on quiet nights. The joyful sounds of men who died believing peace had finally come, unaware that their celebration had been built on a lie. Some say these weren't ghosts at all, but the psychological echoes of mass trauma. Others believe the spirits of those deceived soldiers were trapped in that moment of false hope, doomed to celebrate a peace that never came. The phantom celebration, they say, continues to this day. Montrose Aerodrome, Scotland, 1917. Lieutenant Desmond Arthur, a skilled pilot, dies in what officials call a foolish flying accident. Case closed, or so they thought. Months later, officers at the aerodrome begin reporting an impossible sight. A figure gliding through the bar room, only to vanish at the door. The apparition appears repeatedly, always following the same path, always disappearing at the same spot. Multiple witnesses identify the ghost as Lieutenant Arthur. But why would a dead pilot haunt a bar room? Why would his spirit linger in a place of celebration rather than near his aircraft? The truth was more complex than anyone realized. Arthur's friends believed he'd been blamed unjustly for his own death. They suspected the crash was caused by faulty equipment, not pilot error. The ghost sightings, they claimed, were Arthur's way of demanding justice. When a second inquiry was finally ordered, investigators discovered the truth. The aircraft had indeed suffered mechanical failure. Arthur's reputation was cleared posthumously. Strangely, the ghost was never seen again after the second inquiry concluded. Was this a genuine supernatural encounter? A manifestation of collective guilt? Or perhaps something simpler? The spirits in the officers' glasses making them see spirits of another kind? One thing is certain. Lieutenant Arthur's ghost achieved in death what he couldn't accomplish in life, the restoration of his honor. 5 encounters. 5 impossible stories from the war that was supposed to end all wars. Each one documented. Each one investigated. None of them ever satisfactorily explained. Were these the hallucinations of traumatized minds, pushed beyond their breaking point by horrors no human should witness? Were they the collective delusions of men desperate for hope, protection, or justice in a world gone mad? Or was the Great War so catastrophic, so fundamentally wrong, that it literally tore holes between the world of the living and the dead? The battlefields are silent now. The trenches have been filled. Memorials mark where millions fell. But according to these accounts, some soldiers never received their orders to lay down arms. They're still out there, still fighting, still keeping promises made in humanity's darkest hour. The war that was meant to end all wars may never have truly ended at all. So I'll leave you with this question. In our age of science and skepticism, how do we explain sworn testimonies from trained military personnel? How do we rationalize official investigations that found no logical answers? Were these encounters real? Or does that even matter? Perhaps the real question is what these stories tell us about the human cost of war, not just on the living, but on the very fabric of reality itself. What do you think happened in those trenches? Share your thoughts below. And if these stories have left you questioning what's possible, hit that subscribe button for more mysteries from history's darkest chapters. Until next time, remember that some promises transcend death itself.